Okay, we got a little sidetracked there because there's just so much to talk about in this novel. So it's hard to stay focused on one clear, topic because there's so much here. I've got my light on now. What do you think about that? A little change in lighting. Anyways, I wanted to talk about how Anna Karenina's philosophy seems to hint at Tolstoy's later in life philosophy that he developed surrounding Christianity, in particular his emphasis on the doctrine of non-resistance to evil by force, and more broadly speaking, this sort of non-violent approach to life, which is hinted at in this with Levin especially. And so I sort of connected this to Anna Karenina and how this living a passionate life versus living a intentional, conscious life is, it's tempting to be passionate and to pursue things that make you happy, but it's really much better to be conscious. So one of the things that we see happen many times in Levin's story is this sort of frustration that he undergoes because he's not able to express himself. I relate to that a lot personally. I don't know, it might be because I'm driven a lot by my feelings and sort of my brain rationalizing the feelings that I experience and trying to explain why those feelings exist. I think all humans are emotional beings, and to not acknowledge your feelings is a little callous, but I think it's also an untapped superpower if you don't acknowledge your feelings. Tolstoy, clearly a very empathic human being. That is part of his superpower, I'm sure, and why he was able to produce two of the greatest pieces of literature ever written. And that's reflected as well in Levin, the character who Tolstoy creates as sort of a mirror of himself. What we see happen many times is Levin gets in these arguments either with his brother or whoever. And they have this sort of arguments that the reader is tempted to side with Levin because of the narration. That is not what Levin is saying, but what Tolstoy is saying in his narration, which is sort of explaining Levin's perspective and his feelings, but it's very difficult to actually express, if you're not a gifted writer like Tolstoy. So Levin, the character, is not such a gifted and eloquent person, so he's not able to express this perspective that he has, particularly with his brother, who is like a city guy, very intelligent, very well-read. The argument that takes place between Levin and his brother very clearly seems to be won by the brother, because the brother is just better well-spoken and his arguments are stronger. That being said, the reader tends to side with Levin because of what I said, because of the narration. And so what happens over and over again in this novel is Levin just gets frustrated because he can't win this argument or whatever. Something happens and he's all mad, but then he goes and does something else, such as going to mow the grass. And back then they mowed with these big scythes, and there was a big project. There was like a big team of guys that would go and mow this entire meadow, and it would take all day to mow this meadow. And Levin is, of course, a member of the aristocracy, and it's very unusual that he would participate in the mowing with the lower class, but he does it anyway because he gets this sort of spiritual surge out of it. So this is just one example I'm talking about here, where he argues with his brother and then he goes to mow, and sort of all the frustration that he had from the argument with his brother, all the vexation, which is one of the favorite words of the translators. I guess there's a very common word in Russian that translates to like vexed or vexation in English. Not a very common word in English, but I like it. It's interesting. Levin always gets vexed in this story. So he works out all the vexation by mowing all day. And then he comes back in the evening and he feels amazing just from working all day and sweating and talking to the lower class people. And then he has this sort of subsidence of his frustration. He's talking to his brother again, and he realizes like, hey, we're both right. The brother is once again trying to restart the argument from before and have this sort of clash. And Levin, instead of getting frustrated, he just sort of accepts, hey, we're both right. We can both have different perspectives. And he sort of just thinks it's funny and doesn't really feel inclined to argue as much anymore. And this looks like a direct, I can't call it a reflection because this precedes Tolstoy's religious, spiritual thing that occurs to him later in life. But it's sort of talking about Tolstoy's real life. This sort of foreshadows what Tolstoy undergoes later on in life when he becomes a pacifist. And this sort of this abstention from violence reflected in this the intellectual world, where you can sort of acknowledge the fact that I'm right and you are right, and even though our perspectives sort of clash, it doesn't mean that we're both not right. And it's really a beautiful thing. I thought it was cool. I wanted to share it with you. I love this novel. This is my reread. I love this novel. I highly recommend it to everyone. This is one of those novels that I think any human being can read and appreciate and find a character that they can latch onto. I latch onto like 5 different characters in this novel just because they're all so relatable. But I just wanted to share that little piece of philosophy that I discovered and I thought it was cool. And that's all. Bye.